It's your job to make it happen. Governments for years have tried to do this. What makes you think you're going to be able to achieve it when other governments have failed so many times before?
Keir Starmer last week as Prime Minister was very clear and levelling with the public. We said we'd build these homes. It's going to take us a lot of change, but we're determined to change the planning regulations, to invest more into affordable homes programme and to deliver the housing we desperately need.
Angela Rayner just torpedoed Labour's credibility on national television. Here's the damage report. 1. Defended accepting dodgy donations. 2. Justified a taxpayer-funded Vanity photographer. 3. Claimed people were complaining about not seeing her. 4. Left viewers calling her behavior morally indefensible. 5. Sparked outrage among Labour supporters. But the worst is yet to come. Stick around as we dissect this political train wreck. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Angela Rayner strode onto the BBC set with an air of confidence, but beneath her composed exterior, a storm was brewing. As she settled into her seat, Laura Kensberg wasted no time in launching into pointed questions about Labour's acceptance of questionable donations.
But why do you think that you and Keir Starmer, sitting in Westminster, know better than local councillors on the ground?
Well, at the moment we haven't had mandatory local plans and therefore we've seen speculative developments in areas through permitted development. Decide where you think this development should happen. If they follow the National Planning Policy Framework and that local plan, then we shouldn't have it stuck in the system for years and therefore we're going to push ahead.
The tension in the studio was palpable as Rayner attempted to defend her party's actions. It's a feature of our politics, Rayner asserted, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a hint of unease. She acknowledged the public's frustration, admitting, "I understand some people are frustrated with the situation," but her words did little to quell the growing discontent among viewers. As the interview progressed, Rayner's initial attempts to justify Labour's stance fell flat. Viewer reactions poured in, criticizing the party's ethical standards. One BBC viewer didn't mince words, describing the acceptance of gifts as extraordinary behavior. Another went further, labeling it morally indefensible. The public's disdain was summed up succinctly by a third viewer who declared, "Frankly, it stinks."
What is going to happen is that you are, in some cases, going to force councils to build in parts of the country where they might not want to, and they believe that local people don't all want there to be building.
Because it's based on the local area, it's based on the affordability test, and we know that there is land. They can collaborate, working with other local authorities to bring forward big development sites.
But just to be, really transparent to viewers, what's happening here, rightly or wrongly, is that you are taking control and you are going to use it to force building in parts of the country where local councils and local people might not want it to happen.
Rayner struggled to reconcile Labour's actions with their promises of transparency. The party that had once championed political funding reform now found itself embroiled in a controversy that threatened to undermine its credibility. As Kensberg pressed on, presenting damning evidence of the donations, Rayner's composure began to crack. The interview took a sharp turn as Rayner fumbled through her explanations, leaving Labour supporters disillusioned. Her attempts to justify the party's actions only seemed to highlight the growing gap between Labour's promises and their actual practices. The donation debacle had opened the door to deeper scrutiny of Labour's ethical standards and commitment to transparency. As the segment drew to a close, it was clear that Rayner's performance had done little to assuage public concern. The controversy surrounding Labour's donations had raised serious questions about the party's moral compass. What was meant to be a defense of party practices had instead become a public relations nightmare, leaving viewers questioning the authenticity of Labour's commitment to political reform.
One of those, and we'll hear more detail on it this week, but you are going to grab some power from local councils so that planning applications can be, in some cases, waved through, in some places just speeded up.
I think Ben touched on it. There are things we have to do in order to stop these developments being stuck in the system, and we're determined to deliver that. Well, first of all, we consulted back when we were elected in July. I started a consultation on the National Planning Policy policy framework. So experts, local councils, public were able to feed into that consultation. So there's no need to then keep going round and round in a system. If you deliver on the national planning policy framework and within the local plan, then we should be able to streamline that process and get those developments.
The fallout from this interview was just beginning, and it was evident that Labour would have a long road ahead in rebuilding public trust. As Rayner left the BBC studio, the storm that had been brewing beneath the surface had finally broken, leaving a trail of skepticism and disappointment in its wake. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, Rayner was about to learn that some words come with a hefty price tag. What could possibly justify a taxpayer-funded photographer in an era of austerity? As Kunzberg shifted the interview's focus to Rayner's personal expenses, the Labour deputy leader's composure began to crumble. The BBC host questioned the necessity of a taxpayer-funded photographer, a seemingly innocuous expense that was about to become Rayner's Achilles heel. Rayner's attempt to justify the expense backfired spectacularly. Her explanation that people complain about not seeing her enough drew immediate criticism from viewers. It was a moment of disconnect that highlighted the growing chasm between Labour's leadership and its base. As details of the photographer's cost emerged, public outrage swelled. In a time when many Britons were struggling with the rising cost of living, the idea of a politician splurging on what many saw as a vanity project struck a nerve. Social media exploded with comments from angry constituents, questioning how Rayner could justify such an expense when public services were facing cut. Rayner tried to defend the photographer as part of her official duties, but her arguments fell flat. She insisted that the role was essential for documenting her work and engaging with constituents. However, in the age of smartphones and social media, many viewers found this justification hard to swallow. The contradiction between Labour's criticism of austerity measures and Rayner's personal spending became glaringly apparent. How could a party that claimed to champion the working class justify such an expense? This disconnect resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom had supported Labour based on its promises of fiscal responsibility and understanding of everyday struggle. As the interview progressed, Rayner's explanations became increasingly desperate. Viewers weren't buying it, with many deeming her justifications morally indefensible. The photographer controversy had become a symbol of a deeper issue, the perceived disconnect between Labour's words and action. This fiasco didn't just tarnish Rayner's image, it cast a shadow over the entire Labour Party. It raised questions about their commitment to transparency, fiscal responsibility, and understanding of the average voter's concerns. As the interview wrapped up, it was clear that the damage control for this PR disaster was just beginning. Labour now faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust with a base that felt increasingly alienated by what they saw as out-of-touch leadership. Angela Rayner's disastrous TV appearance has left Labour's credibility in tatters. Her fumbling attempts to justify questionable donations and a taxpayer-funded photographer have exposed a growing chasm between the party's promises and actions. Voters are left wondering, is this the same Labour that once championed transparency and fiscal responsibility? The fallout from this interview goes beyond just Rayner. It's a damning indictment of Labour's leadership as a whole. How can a party that claims to understand the struggles of ordinary people be so out of touch? The hypocrisy is staggering, and it's not lost on the public. This debacle has sparked a crisis of confidence among Labour supporters. Many are questioning whether the party truly represents their values anymore. As one viewer put it, the whole situation frankly stinks. It's a sentiment that's likely to linger in voters' minds for a long time to come.